Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Immersive Tech Talk podcast series presented by VRD HealthTech. I'm Sherry Marion, CEO of VRD HealthTech, and we're pleased to have our host, Professor Skip Rizzo, who will be engaging in dialogue with various experts in the digital mental health field across the course of the podcast series. Professor Rizzo will interview today's amazing guest, a nationally recognized innovator at the intersection of technology, mental health, and immersive media, Dr. Russell Shilling. Before we start the discussion, let me introduce you to VRD HealthTech. VRD HealthTech is an accelerator for the adoption of immersive technology by partnering with emerging application creators to market, sell, onboard, and train users in health and wellness solutions. We offer these applications to hospitals, clinics, educators, and corporations to benefit their patients, students, clients, and their community. VRD is proud to have the support and guidance from experts in virtual reality, such as our host, Professor Skip Rizzo. Skip Rizzo is a professor at USC and director of medical virtual reality. He serves as an advisor and chief science officer for our partner, Cognitive Leap, exploring methods to address attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, in children. Our guest today is Dr. Russell Shilling, who is a nationally recognized innovator at the intersection of technology, mental health, and immersive media. Dr. Shilling initiated the Department of Defense's first research program for virtual reality therapy for PTSD, now widely deployed in VA clinics. At the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, otherwise known as DARPA, he led cutting-edge initiatives in AI-driven conversational agents, affective computing, and serious games for education and wellness. He was also a key contributor to the development of America's Army, one of the most successful government-created games. He partnered with Sesame Workshop to produce award-winning media, supporting military children through trauma and transition. After his military service, Dr. Shilling was appointed by the Obama administration to lead STEM innovation at the U.S. Department of Education, where he championed ARPA Ed and helped shape national education policy. As Chief Scientific Officer of the American Psychological Association, he expanded national efforts to ensure the ethical and effective use of emerging technology in behavioral and mental health, as well as support for evidence-based practice. Today, he advises startups, philanthropies, and federal agencies on utilizing DARPA-inspired R&D practices, AI, immersive technology, and behavioral science to address pressing challenges in wellness, education, and digital inclusion. His recent work includes developing AI-powered coaching systems and leading efforts to design engaging education games on platforms like Roblox. So now, let's go ahead and turn it over to Skip and Russell.
All righty. Well, thank you for that great introduction. Russ, I don't know what to say. It's long overdue that you're on this podcast. I've been thinking about having you for a long time, and I've been really looking forward to our conversation today because I just have to get it out. Your input and involvement and support over the years has been pivotal for the growth of all the work that we've done in the MedVR lab. So with that, I want to start off just with a quick highlight about how we initially met. And I believe it goes back to 2004 when we were toying around with the PTSD concept, the exposure therapy using VR for combat-related PTSD. What was called Virtual Iraq at the time, and has subsequently grown into BraveMind. But I remember you reaching out that you had heard about or seen a demo that we were doing at a conference somewhere, and that you were curious about more information about it. And you said, well, I'm at O&R and maybe we can find some funds. And then I think a couple weeks later, in July of 2004, paper came out in New England Journal of Medicine, Charlie Hogue and his crew, that really brought to the public's attention, the fact that you know, we were looking again at Vietnam levels of PTSD from the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, particularly in Iraq at the time. Um, and that really, I think, drove things. And it led to a quantum shift in a lot of the work I was doing. I was doing a lot of work in cognitive assessment and rehab and panoramic video and so on. But we had the concept for Brave Mind. We built a demo with Gerald Pear really driving the technical development. And you were right there and managed to put together a whole research program that funded our initial development of a Brave Mind and clinical implementation, and that really kicked off the whole trajectory of our work in that area. If you hadn't come along at that time, we might have just had a cool demo and never, brought it to fruition. So I'm very grateful for that. And then, we'll get into it later, but over the years, we've worked together in your different roles with the Defense Center of Excellence, DARPA, and on and on and on. So we'll get into that. But I want to thank you for being my friend and colleague over the years. So with that little setup here, can you take over now and just talk a little bit about what got you into O&R and what was the preliminary steps in America's Army and your, going back to when did you ever start thinking that this might be a career for you?
Yeah, and certainly I can't imagine my career over the last 20 years without you in it. So it's been a great adventure on both ends, I think. So just the intelligence that you've brought to the and innovation have been just wonderful, and the ideas you've helped spur have been vital. Yeah, for me, it goes back to graduate school. So my original PhD was in experimental psychology, and I was studying children's hearing and adults, but I was creating video games to embed the auditory tasks and to study the kids' hearing because the tasks were so boring. And so I got to really get into the power of gaming for doing serious purposes. And this was in the late 80s. I was using some initial touchscreen technologies. And then for reasons that are probably too long to go into for this podcast, I decided when I finished my PhD to join the Navy, as one does after a PhD. Immediately coming out, and they put me to work on simulation and training. So I went through Navy training as an aerospace experimental psychologist, was put to work on simulation systems, doing 3D hearing work, started becoming really interested in the role of emotion in simulation and training, especially through sound. And that's where things started to come together. So ended up doing some projects that involved Lucasfilm at Skywalker Sound and THX. And they started really getting me deep into the storytelling and high-end development types of ideas that we would later put to work and still working. And then I was assigned to the Naval Postgraduate School, where we put together the video game America's Army, which had millions of users and went on for 20 years. I was the sound designer for that for the first 6 years. And I started becoming interested in other uses for gaming technology. One of them was for training and education, of course, which I did a lot of work subsequently on using gaming technology. But the other thing I started becoming interested in was using it for phobias and medical purposes. So I've been reading the virtual Vietnam papers from way back when, looking at phobia work that Hunter Hoffman was doing. And I wanted to do some research. I wanted to use gaming platforms to develop it, but I couldn't get anybody to fund it, which sounds probably familiar to you, Skip. So it was hard to get the interest in. But my next assignment was at Office of Naval Research, and that's where we started coming together. So I had this list of things I wanted to do that I couldn't get funded. So as a program officer, I started funding them. And so in 2005, I managed to finally talk them into letting me invest $5 million. So not a lot, really. I brought you on, Hunter Hoffman and his lab, and the Virtual Reality Medical Center. And so it was kind of the three teams that I saw that were doing the most work in this area that looked interesting. You all had different techniques, different ways you were developing the virtual environments. Yours actually was closest to my vision of using game types of materials to build virtual environments. But there were different processes in how you were doing the therapy as well. So I wanted to really have as many different examples to draw from, so that we could make sure that if there was a there behind virtual reality therapy, we could get to it. And to be honest, at that time, there really was, even among those examples I gave and the work Hunter was doing, there wasn't a lot of data that really backed us up on it. So we were going out on a limb on it, and it was really the first program that the DoD had funded on new therapies for PTSD to that time. And so that's kind of where I came in and ran into you.
Well, I think your America's Army work actually helped support our development of BraveMind because I don't know if I should say this, but you ended up giving us a bunch of really good audio clips that we incorporated into the BraveMind app because we'd always said, the visuals sort of set the stage, particularly back then where the visuals weren't so great or detailed, but they would set the stage of putting someone in an environment, but sound really drove the emotion. And I think you mentioned this to me, and I repeat this quote all the time, like it's my own, but that there was some film producer or director that once said, "Good sound makes bad film look better."
Then the same with games as well.
Yes, and so that was really helpful in our work.
Yeah.
And,
well, it was funny because, like you, so I funded Hunter, so Hunter got his funding, and you all put me to work. And I've never had this experience with people that I funded in government. But Hunter asked me to design sound for a bus bombing simulation he was doing for the University of Haifa at that time. So you all put me to work as soon as I started giving you money, which seemed a little odd to me at the time.
But once we knew you had something more than money to offer, we pig piled on. The cool thing about this was it wasn't just for the development. You provided funding for the initial clinical trials, and that was really helpful. We did that work with Jim McClay at the Naval Medical Center in San Diego, Barbara Rothbaum, Joanne DeFede weighing in, and so forth. And so that was really good, and that led to the first open clinical trial that documented that, hey, there's some there, and we could move forward. And then that led to other opportunities to continue to evolve BraveMind, which occurred later on in 2011 as the technology got better and we had the data behind us. But then I think it was 2009, 2010 in your role of at the Defense Center of Excellence, you had an idea about using virtual humans that could provide support to veterans, service members, their family online so that you could have an engaged conversation with a character and find out information about yourself, taking various assessments. The character could direct you to resources, direct you to live providers and everything. It wasn't, as your term that I use all the time, it wasn't a doc in a box. And the beauty of that was really one of the first chatbots, mental health chatbots. And you were pivotal because you came to me with the idea and asked me if we could build it at ICT. And we've been tinkering with virtual humans for different use cases for clinical training, building virtual patients and everything. But this was a little different application. What spurred on that thought initially? What gave you that idea?
Yeah. So in 2007, Congress appropriated an enormous amount of money, $900 million, to address issues that were coming out of the war around PTSD, depression, suicide, and traumatic brain injury. And $300 million of it was research coded. But our goals, some of the goals that we had were to improve access to care, which was a problem at that time because we didn't have the therapists, and we still don't. It's still a problem. And the other one was stigma. And so looking at our work in games and in simulation, it made sense. You start, part of destigmatizing something like mental health care is to start getting into the storytelling of it, getting into the conversation. And so, you can start using games, you can start using simulation, comics, and you name it. You can start rolling these different things in to start changing people's views on what mental health care is. And then basically that came along through a lot of conversations going on at the Center of Excellence. And we thought that using these chatbots might be a way of getting around the problem. And
It's
it was certainly an interesting process.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. In 2010, we built something, even though it was highly scripted and it didn't leverage AI, it really kind of pointed the future towards how conversational agents that now we're working on, which with much higher levels of interactive content and AI powered. Um, Keeping in mind these things need to be developed in an ethical format, but the vision really was struck in 2009, 2010 with that proposal and
Yeah.
with the beginning development. I can remember somebody, I'm not going to mention his name, but at the time he was working uh, with you and he reached out to me. He goes, "What the hell is this?" And I described to him what Sim Coach would be. And he goes, "That is the craziest thing in the world. You cannot have veterans talking to software to get this information." And I'm happy to say, you know who I'm talking about. He's at USC, and he came to the lab about 6, 8 months ago, and I showed him the old Sim Coach, and I showed him the stuff we're working on now, and he goes, "God, if I knew back then where this was going to head, I would have said throw more money at it." Um,
I would have too. So
but it really
yeah.
set, yeah, go ahead.
Well, and we learned so much from it that we can actually apply now that the AI is catching up with the tech, with what we were doing. We learned a lot of the basics about how to design chatbots
Yes.
and how to and the ins and outs, the things you should be doing with patients and people who need outreach, and the things you can do and you can't do.
Yeah, I mean, it also forced us to really think about the ethical and professional safety elements. If somebody mentioned suicide, then the software would immediately go into, here is the number that you should call to talk to a live person. Sim Coach would say something, like, past the point, I'm just a piece of software. And, what you're describing really needs to talk. You need to talk to a real human.
Yeah. But the one thread that has maintained, and it is today, is it doesn't, these technologies don't replace humans.
Right.
And we had to make that clear then. And I think our research as we were doing it really backed it up that, you can't replace a human therapist in the process.
Right.
But what you can do is enhance the ability of human therapists to have an impact and to get people into therapy who may not necessarily get into it on their own. So,
Yeah, you can fill in that gap where somebody who might never think about talking to a real person through engagement with these kinds of pieces of software and through the self-awareness that gets developed and the breeding of awareness of what options are out there, that they're more open to seeking help. And the destigmatization that you mentioned earlier, that's one of the key things. I mean, that's one of the key findings in all this work, that people feel more comfortable self-disclosing personal information to a piece of software or AI agent than they might with a real human. And in that process, that may be almost like basic training for them to become more comfortable in
Yeah.
sharing their experience with a real human.
Yeah,
And
and what
that's really the
we built
goal.
really demystified the psychological. If you can give somebody the experience of what it's like to talk to a therapist before they go in, and they have some idea of what's going on, it certainly helps them moving forward.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, after that, you took on a role at DARPA and headed what was called DCAPS, the Detection and Computational Analysis of Psychological Signals. And it served to advance our work as well as the work of many others that have gone on to great heights in this area, where it was the use of a virtual human, but also adding in affective computing, sensing of the user's behavior, their facial expression, their gesture, posture, their acoustic properties of their speech, and using that information as an additional signal to detect if somebody was having difficulty, or to be able to even use it as part of an assessment or a diagnostic procedure. Because, the one thing I've taken away from all that work is that everybody says the eyes are the window to the soul, and there's some truth to that, but really the voice is really a window into the soul, that you can pick up a lot of information about user state by looking at vocal analytics. We've done studies with detection of suicide, with comparing audio interviews of teenagers that were suicidal, had suicidal ideation, versus a control group, and seeing standard patterns of vocalization that differentiated the group. How did that idea, was that a hard sell to DARPA at the time, or was this the natural progression that DARPA saw as what we need to do to make interaction with computers more compelling, more diagnostic, if you will?
Yeah, it's a combination of things. So, so one of the things when I got there, they were interested, definitely interested in pushing along the thought of funding some psychological health programs, because it was a big issue, certainly at that time. Um, so what based on the earlier work on chatbots, the questions we started having were, what if you could have a better AI, which, still the technology wasn't there, but starting to combine things. There's a lot of talk even today about wearables and sensors and a lot of other things, but there's not been a lot of data into how effective they can be. And in specifically, what the problem is how do they interact in a complex system like a virtual environment or a chatbot kind of environment. And so our thought was, let's actually do a Mach 1 version and start putting all of these elements together. And the beauty of a DARPA program, for those who aren't familiar with DARPA, is it allows you to get different experts together onto a team that normally don't work together. And so we were able to bring in the best people in the nation on voice recognition technologies, on semantic analysis, on EEG, on wearables. We had really the top people in the nation, and people who didn't necessarily had worked on psychological health programs before, but we were bringing all of that expertise together to have everybody work together and work through these issues. And that was the beauty of that program. And I think that's what really, where you and I especially learned the most about what designing these things is all about, and what the future of the technology held. And unfortunately, as we've said, what we didn't have was the type of AI that we have today. So it was still pretty dumb overall. It was still a useful platform that we created, but you couldn't really have a naturalistic chat with it. It was still very still
Scripted.
It was scripted. And so it responded well. We got around it. It looked pretty transparent for where it was. But we really we saw where it could go from there.
And it did generate some good human behavioral research. I mean, we were able to run a large sample of people, some that were highly distressed and some that
Yes.
were pretty fine, pretty okay, and detect different elements of facial behavior, downward eye gaze, and smile ratio,
Yeah.
intensity of smiles, the vocal parameters, gesture,
Yeah.
posture, all these
Eh,
things
Yeah.
that were
And the
turned out to be
project was,
clear
yeah.
markers.
Yeah, and the project was big enough. What was interesting too is we also had discussions with experts on ethics. So we were, DARPA programs are big enough that you aren't really having to skimp for the types of things that you are putting into it. So we had like panels that were put together by Sandy Pentland at MIT on the ethics of doing the things we were talking about doing. And so, it was really a soup to nuts kind of program that got us thinking across the board.
I think it had some influence, maybe on Facebook. I'm blanking on the fellow's name that worked with us that uh, tried to get Facebook, or they did a study on people that getting the profiles,
Oh,
Facebook
you're killing
profiles
me.
of
Now I can't remember his name.
I know.
And I was just looking up his
Chris
profile.
Chris
Poland, yes, Chris
Poland.
Poland.
Yeah. And it was the idea of getting Facebook profiles of people who had committed suicide and doing a deep level machine analysis so
Yes, which
that,
we didn't do in our project, but was a
yeah,
great idea. So,
yeah.
um,
And
yeah. So and we had it was an amazing team. So we learned a lot from it, and we'll get back to it more of what we are doing with it now a little later, I think.
yeah. So, okay. Now, around this time, I think you retired from the military a little bit after that period. And you took on a number of important roles. Do you want to just give a quick
Yeah. So the other thing I
summary of
was
that?
Yeah, the other thing I was doing in the military, which again, it was an unusual career at best with America's Army, but I also started a program that I worked on over 6 years with Sesame Workshop on helping young children and their families cope with grief, injury, having an injured parent come back from combat, and separation anxiety. Um, and learned a lot from that, but started getting pulled in rapidly into the education side of things. So I had another DARPA program on STEM education games that I was developing, which was very successful. And a lot of things ended up on the early versions of the website BrainPop from what we were doing, but a good program. But I started drawing the attention of the Department of Education. At the same time, I realized my two sons were autistic. And so I was more and more interested in family issues and childhood education issues than I had been. So, they approached me when I was at DARPA and asked me if I was willing to join the Obama administration, get out of the military, uh, and go to the Department of Education and start talking about creating DARPAs for education. So that same type of complex program that we had created for the chatbot we just talked about for education programs. And so that's kind of took me off into that space. And then when the Obama administration ended, I left and for a short time was the chief science officer at APA, American Psychological Association, and was really interested. I had a lot of other duties, but I was really interested in technology policy at that point and ethical use of technology for psychological health. The one thing about chatbots, there is pushback from a lot of sectors about the safety and efficacy, which are exceptionally important. But there are also cultural issues and other biases. And so it's really trying to educate the community and the policy areas about, what policies need to be in place that would help regulate and make sure that these technologies are safe without inhibiting the good that they can also do. And so trying to find those balances. So that was kind of what I was working on in those days. And at the same time, when I left that, I started working with various philanthropies on the kind of a DARPA for education process that went forward from there.
And you also did some work with Autism Speaks. You've been an advisor with them.
Yeah, that's more recent.
Yeah.
So recently, I joined the Medical and Science Advisory Committee for Autism Speaks, where I'm helping them think through the next stages of their organization with emerging technologies. As they're starting to think now beyond early childhood where they were and thinking about quality of life issues and accessibility and things like that for adults and beyond. So they've expanded their thinking, and a lot of what you and I've worked on, I think, is now going to be very applicable to
Yes.
these other populations.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about specifically clinical virtual reality and the idea that we both got involved in this in the 1990s, the idea of VR, and mainly out of our dissatisfaction with the existing standards that were being applied, whether it was in education or in my area in rehab. When you look back, going from the 90s when it was still a nascent field with a lot of great vision, but not a lot of delivery. What do you think are some of the more significant achievements that you've witnessed in how VR is applied clinically since that time? Not talking about the future yet. We'll save that for the next question.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So I came in 1993 into the Navy, and so I was working on virtual reality training systems. And everything was very expensive. Everything was being developed on very expensive servers. And so, the things that have really shaped our world is the price point coming down. And what was significant about the USC part of the project on the VR therapy, I think, was really to see how low we could bring that price point. Could we get it into the hands? Hospitals are just not that well funded. And they don't have a lot of appetite for complex computer hardware. And so could we bring it down into a practical type of package? And I think that's one of the biggest things that happened for the adaptability of the software. I'd argue actually over the last since the 90s when we started this, I think the healthcare field has been the one area that's kept virtual reality active and kind of healthy in between the low periods. And I'd say the other thing that's we haven't discussed, one of the other things I funded was just a very, very small part of his work, but Hunter Hoffman's work in pain control. And so these other areas that have popped up over the years using immersive technology in healthcare and what the VA has done. So the Veterans Affairs, when you look at how much they have adopted immersive technology in recent years, it's amazing. The other thing I laugh about is, when you and I first started, we would go to conferences and we'd have a small room of people who would show up to our events. And now we have whole conferences devoted to what we're doing. And so, seeing how, what I think we did is we showed people what it could do. So especially your systems, you would go to somebody and say, yeah, what about a clinician and say, what about virtual reality for therapy? And they'd go turn back and say, that sounds like a dumb idea. And then you'd show them what it could do. And then they'd say, I want one of those in my clinic. And so again, it was this kind of developing the examples and showing what the possibilities were. So I think those growth areas over these years have been what have excited me the most.
It's still amazing though, when you go to some events, clinically oriented events, and you see people for the first time getting it now. And it just seemed like such an intuitive idea, back in the 90s, even though it was very difficult to execute on it. It just seems so intuitive. And now people are finally getting it. But the challenge that we still face is, people always say, when is it going to be mainstream? When is it going to be ready for prime time? I wrote an article back in 2017 saying, is VR ready for prime time? And I made the case that it was. But what are the challenges that we still have to face, to make this be like not just some surprise when you walk into a doctor's office, but or a clinician's office, but just it's kind of expected that you would use simulation technology. What's the holdup?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of things. One is messaging around technology in general. So, I mean, when you look at the popular media and you get on LinkedIn or other social media, what you hear is, well, this AI chatbot isn't as good as the best tutors, or it's not as good as the best therapist, which we're not trying to make a therapist, but it's not as good as the best whatever. Fill in the blank. Well, the problem that most people don't really recognize in these conversations is that the bulk of humanity, especially here in the United States, don't have the access to the best of anything. And in a lot of cases, they don't have access to anything. And so, thinking when you're designing these for those populations that are lacking services and seeing them as not a replacement for services, but, a Band-Aid, something that can actually, bring help to people who wouldn't get it otherwise, and couching it like that. And the other thing is, you hear people saying, well, I saw this person and they really don't like technology. All right, then they wouldn't be good with VR therapy. I mean, these aren't silver bullets. Not everybody is going to be good with an AI chatbot or an intelligent conversational agent. They're not all going to like VR therapy. I have concerns in the autism community about headsets, for instance. So not everything has to be in a headset. And so I think getting these kind of conversations going about, kind of educating what the ins and outs of the technologies are, and not overpromising, but also just being very realistic about what they can offer.
Well, you brought up the issue of autism. What do you see in terms of, where we started, God, back 96, 7, Dorothy Strickland trying to see if she could get a kid on the spectrum to put on a VR headset and have an experience, and doing a lot of research around developing what would be useful for that. Since that time, we see, companies like Florio and,
Augment therapy that you're
yes,
familiar with.
right,
Yeah,
right.
so
Without
yeah,
a headset in augment
without a
therapy.
headset. Yeah. So augment therapy is an interesting one. That it's an immersive technology, really, without a headset for doing motor rehab. And they've partnered with Niantic and Sesame Street to use their characters, dance along with Elmo, or dance along with the Cookie Monster, or a Pokemon, type of character. And they were working a lot with neurodivergent kids, and it's working very well. Florio is doing wonderful work. I just would like to see more going on. It needs to be in the hands of more parents and more kids, and more discussion and more research funding going into it. There's a lot that can be done.
Where do you think that funding will come from? Do you think there's any hope that the current administration might step up? They seem to be always chirping about the increases and trying to blame it on a lot of things that we know aren't the cause of autism, like vaccines. But
One of the things I think we have seen over the years, and whichever way you take, about philosophy behind autism, is there has been broad bipartisan support for autism, and giving supports to the kids. What I want to see more is in the adults and beyond phase, which we haven't seen as much support. But I think there is bipartisan support for that. So I think we could see it. We need to do more to actually, tout the role of technology. So for helping accessibility for adults, for instance, for helping caregivers, across the board, there's so much more we can be doing for the community. But there have been cuts to some autism funding, but overall, things have been, fairly bipartisan there.
Yeah, that's good. So what do you see looking into your crystal ball for the future, whether it's with autism or generally across the field of clinical applications, with the idea, our next little topic is going to be on the AI front, but what do you see in these other areas?
Yeah, I'd say seeing a lot of these things come together. So I think we're very close with large language model types of applications where the therapist can start describing the scenario they want for their patient and be able to put them into that scenario, which then opens it up for so many other treatment possibilities. And for the neurodiverse. So if somebody's showing a phobia or a problem in coping with specific stimuli, it's going to be a lot easier for you to create those scenarios to work on the phobias and other types and anxieties and things like that. And then I see a lot more on the analytics side. So, one of my pet peeves is that speech recognition systems for children, especially young children, really still aren't that good. And when you start getting into kids with accents, English as a second language, and a lot of other issues, they get very poor and certainly not good enough to do assessments clinically, which we were founding recently in a Gates program I was working on. So I'd like to see more development of these technologies so that we can start implementing them and combining them into systems for assessment and treatment.
Yeah, I think, you're hitting on the point that, the first 25, 30 years, it's always been about, well, can we make something for a specific condition that at least will show some promise? Can we do exposure therapy? Can we do pain management for acute pain? And then, what about for complex regional pain or chronic pain? And the rehab front, what are the ingredients for building good rehab scenarios that engage people to do more of their training and can we measure performance in ways that are different? Now, I think there's a giant pile of that research that's been pretty favorable, but now the next step is the dismantling studies, the unique developments, the enhancement of certain elements of technology, the integration of, like you're saying, with better voice recognition. Then, there's a company out of Belgium that's working on stuttering, where you
Yes.
interact with virtual agents, and it's doing a complex analysis of the vocal pattern and can give tactics or strategies or understand the person and engage them. But it relies on that core technology of understanding speech or
Yes.
understanding the influence of a biomarker. And can we get that from an Apple Watch or a Fitbit and have it
Yeah,
be adequate resolution for the clinical
I
purpose
agree.
and so on?
And just to go back to an earlier question too, I think we need to see, we've seen the government funding this. This is back to the earlier question, but I think we need to see more philanthropic contributions to these areas too, because then you can start doing things that, it's very hard to do in the government, in the contracting and grant side. So I think getting a lot of these technologies implemented, proper social impact VCs, those that do exist, all of these things need to come together to make these things happen.
Well, a case in point, a classic example is the Soldier Strong Foundation that raises private money and has, dramatically improved and made more accessible the PTSD, the Brave Mind work, and recently provided funding for us to advance the work going beyond combat-related PTSD, but to begin to address civilian and military sexual trauma. And that, that's a hard sell. I've applied for funding with federal agencies and the DoD, and um, actually, I've been told by some folks in the DoD funding area that Skip, your work, that's a VA problem now. You need to go to the VA for money, and it's like, well, I guess they're handing it
It's an
off.
everybody's problem. So
Yes, it is. It is. But so we've been very fortunate with private funding that has,
Yeah.
really, and the dollar to impact is quite dramatic. So these foundations that have been funding, I think there's more of an emphasis to deliver a usable product, not just to write papers and publications and do studies,
Yeah.
but to deliver things that people can
Yeah.
use.
Yeah.
In
And that's the world I've had to straddle all of these years. So again, as a program officer, I want to see product at the end.
yeah,
Uh, but also you want to see the field going forward and advancing.
yep, yep. Well, we've got 5 minutes before we're going to open it up for audience questions. So this gives us an opportunity to talk about our latest harebrained scheme, or I mean, adventure. Um, And that is really going back to a direct through line from SimCoach to what we're doing now with Sidekick as advisors to Sidekick. I got involved with them via uh, the idea of taking our Battle Buddy application that we developed at ICT, a mental health and suicide prevention mobile app, and making it more powerful through the integration of AI. And you came on board, and it took the architecture in a little bit different direction. Do you want to talk about that
Yeah,
work?
well, I've been creating some. So first, Sidekick is something that we need to describe a little bit. It's been described to me as kind of a Squarespace for creating intelligent conversational agents. And so it allows any group with no coding experience to put together chatbots that do not hallucinate and that only talk about the information that you have approved beforehand, um, to be virtual experts to represent your organization. Um, Hang on, didn't silence my notifications. Um, And so, yeah, so we were doing this work, and one of the things I decided to do is to put together uh, an autism demonstration. So, how could we create something that would support autism parents, caregivers, and eventually autistic people, helping them through the accessibility issues and issues they may have on a daily basis, or getting funding or dealing with finances. There's so many things you can do with this. And so what we've done is we've actually brought to bear everything we've learned over the last 15 years in this area, and are starting to feed it into this program to actually build what is now an actual product and in testing.
It's such a breath of fresh air to work with an entity where it's not a 2-3 year process to build out this content, that you can actually have content, author it properly, put it into a porthole, and all of a sudden, now you've got an agent that you can interact with on this topic area. You have to keep evolving it and adding more content or taking some out depending on what the direction is for the interaction. But this is the beauty of it. I mean, it makes content generation or authoring so much more efficient, and that opens the door for tremendous amounts of research
Oh yeah,
as to where the value of these things are. You don't have to work
yeah.
on it for three
Oh,
years
yeah.
before you
And
can test
I
it.
can put together an expert on a specific topic if it's well defined and there's a lot of information available in about an hour. So
Yep, same here.
yeah. So it's a very user friendly system. It's a way of getting these chatbots out to the world, basically.
Right.
We've built it around safety, privacy, and security. So I mean, it's really incorporated all of the lessons learned from the last couple decades.
Case in point, beyond the veteran work, I have an interest in maternal health care, and I was able to upload content in about 15 minutes, of well-vetted self-help content for women going through pregnancy. And now we have, you know, an application where a woman can get information about anything relevant to their well-being throughout their pregnancy. And if they interact with that during that period, Then after they give birth, if they happen to run into trouble, as 1 in 4 women that give birth do with postpartum depression or other variants of that, then the software agent has some awareness of how their pregnancy went and what and about them specifically, and can weigh in and help them find the care they need, give them something to
Yeah.
talk to, and move forward.
Yeah,
So with that,
yeah, and so many other applications for university support, different types of patients, and even just general information and public and letting people know what your research reports are about from your nonprofit. So
yep.
goes. Oh, we're being cut
All
off here, I think.
I
Well,
think we have to
yeah.
get to questions. I'm sure
Yeah,
there's going to be a ton of them.
I just wanted to see if we could open it up now for a question or two. Um, as a reminder, participants joining from the webinar, they can directly ask a question through the Q&A window, while participants from the YouTube live stream can also ask questions in the live chat. So we do have one question here that I think it's directed to both of you, which is, and I think you touched on this, Russ, in during your last bit, but question is, love hearing about y'all's view on effectiveness of AI in the treatment process. Do you all see data privacy being at the levels needed to implement in healthcare industry?
That is an important question. That's the
It's an
key
excellent question.
question. People aren't going to go ahead, Russ. You go.
Yeah, and I'll let Skip jump in. I'd say, the other issue that we need to talk about, and that it's not talked about enough in on the social medias, when people are talking AI, they're talking about specific large language model platforms. I am very hesitant about having direct conversations with them and saying that that is an AI tool for mental health, because you can't really guarantee privacy and security there. So you really need to have your engineers build the walled gardens of security and privacy, and have the policies in place to make sure and have some auditing and everything else needed to assure that that information is private.
Russ, you just sent me an article a couple days ago about barriers to use of these kinds of AI things, and security and privacy was at the top of the heap. And the idea, can you trust having an authentic conversation for whatever purpose with an AI? That is tied back to, well, who's going to be able to hear this? Who's going to be able to go through this data? Who's going to be able to identify me from this? And so this is not just an ethical thing, but it's a pragmatic element that if you want people to take this seriously, you've got to ensure right down to the last, bite that that you are protecting this.
And if you are saying that you are creating, what Skip and I were just mentioning is an information application, not a treatment application. But if your goal is treatment using AI, then it's up to you to actually have that research for safety and efficacy conducted. And that includes actually reviewing the privacy and security issues.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for your thoughts there, Skip and Russ. Appreciate that. We do have another question, which is, thank you for providing the backstory of Dr. Shilling's work. Very helpful context for where we are today. Regarding the need for more scenarios that address specific conditions for autistic and neurodiverse persons, here at the dawn of generative AI for creating 3D assets and environments, what are your thoughts on boosting the ability for clinicians to create original content, and even for some patients to contribute to scenario design?
Yeah. Well, I have two thoughts, and I think we touched on it a while ago. I think with where generative AI is going at this point, I don't think it's going to be very long before we will be able to have clinicians being able to verbally discuss what an environment would be. The other thing I think, I very strongly think about applications specifically for the autism community and other neurodiverse communities is co-design. And so I'm really big these days on insisting that if you're going to develop an autism application, you need to have autistic people on your program. I mean, hard stop. And so I think, those are both things. You need to have the input and the participation from the community that you're trying to treat. And if you're doing, it's the same. We do this with veterans. So if we're going to work with veterans, we talk to veterans. So we need to make sure we do this with all the communities.
Skip, anything you want to add there?
No, I think Russ, pretty much covered it. I don't want to be redundant on this.
Okay. So I just have one question for you, Russ, and that is, if you had one piece of advice to offer for those that are entering the field of autism research, mental health technology, or clinical VR, what would it be?
Don't get too focused. Keep an open mind. Again, I think where our research projects have really benefited over the years is having all these other people coming in and out of our lives and our programs. So I think the DARPA program, more than anything, really changed my perspectives on really needing interdisciplinary work done to solve complex problems cannot be solved by a single person. They require a team of different experts to get to different aspects of what you're trying to solve. And so keep an open mind. If you've got a startup, remember, it's possible to work with other startups. So, bring people in and get other views.
That's great advice. Really great. Any additional last thoughts there before we say our thank yous to the audience?
One more for you, Russ. And this is a question.
Dear. This can't go well.
I usually ask this of everyone on the podcast earlier on, but if you had unlimited money in 2 years, unlimited resources, what would you tackle? What would be the problem you would tackle? You had 2 years to tackle it and produce something.
Yeah, I think at this point in my life and where I'm looking, I would start looking at creating some of these combining immersive technologies and generative AI types of technologies to support accessibility and quality of life for the autistic community, especially for independent people, those struggling with independent living and wanting independent living opportunities. I think those are really huge things that we can tackle now with all of these things, with these technologies, but we need the funding to do it and the will.
Right. On the content generation, there is a company, SciTech, that you can talk into it or type into the headset and describe your trauma experience. And within 30 seconds, it will create a spherical still image of that content. It still has a long way to go. I tested it out and asked it to create a Ukrainian war zone in a wooded area with World War I trenches and artillery and everything. And it was beautiful. It had all the trenches, it had the wooded areas. It was really cool until you got to the artillery. And when you got to the tank, it looked like a porcupine, a metallic porcupine. It had turrets shooting up everywhere out of it. And it was like, okay, we still have a ways to go, but you can see where this is going.
Yes. Absolutely.
So I think this will be it needs a lot of research, but I think it's a very positive step forward for customizing the experience.
Yeah. And I'll also add in, again, the speech recognition work. We need more open access models. Right now, most models, training models are proprietary. We need all of these things to be, all the funding to make open source models so people can get into it and improve it.
All right. Well, this seems like a great place. I'd like to say to our audience once again, thank you for so much for joining this episode of Immersive Tech Talk. I hope you've enjoyed our amazing guest today as much as I have. Thank you, Russell Shilling, and thank you again to our incredible host, Skip Rizzo. For our audience, the video recordings of this event will be available on our YouTube channel. Please feel free to share it with anyone who might be interested in the topic. And we look forward to seeing you again at our next event and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks again.